That's called Nigun Mitzpi by Rabbi Shlomo Katz. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? We've got a very interesting page of Talmud today. A big departure from what we've been doing. Let's light up the darkness. All right, who's going to be with us tonight as we get it going on a fine Tuesday evening here in LA? Yehudit Sobel is in South Carolina, Pauline in Arkansas, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, Ed in Galloway, Chaim says good evening from Channel 6, not sure what that means. John Shore, my pal in Sedona, says buenas tardes, amigo. Edgar's in San Antonio. James is saying shalom from Indy. Meg Dome in Pennsylvania. Paul in Chicago. Bill in Arkansas. Renee in Indy. Chaim says Charlotte is in the house. Hannah's in Mississippi. Elizabeth, excuse me, says hi there. Perfect timing. Shalom from Port Charlotte, Florida. And Rochelle is in foggy Modesto. Nancy's in North Carolina. Lucy in Minnesota. Edgar says Jews are everywhere. Lynn is in Whidbey Island, Washington. Laura in North Augusta, South Carolina. Bonnie saying blessings from Oregon. We're having a lot of fun over there. On the YouTube side, Neil with us from Virginia, Lynn in North Texas, and Sheila Brester is with us from Montana saying, I love my new accidental Talmudist pillow. That's the merchandise from our store, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. I'm telling you, that pillow, it's sweet looking and it's so comfortable. I'm not sure what the material is, but it's just really good to have a cat on a couch and lay your head down on it. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you. Before I say anything else, you know we're in our annual campaign, and I've been making the pitch every day to donate to us. But I've also said that what's important is to donate it all, right? We set aside 10% of our income, and it goes to Meiser, right? It's a tithe. We put it immediately into a separate account. And what do we give to? We give to all kinds of causes, particularly Jewish education, Torah education, and also, and you know, some would say more important, we would say equally important, but very important, is organizations that feed people, clothe people, shelter people. So today, we're very honored to share a link with you. Nina's going to put it in the comments to a wonderful organization here in Los Angeles, Tomche LA. I think they got started providing people who couldn't afford to have a proper Shabbos dinner with everything that they would need for a Shabbos dinner. But I think their activities have expanded, and so they're definitely providing food to the food insecure, but they're also involved in providing shelter, clothing, jobs, and job opportunities. Great organization. They're having a 2-day fundraiser. We've already donated to them, and we are happy to share the link, even in the midst of our own campaign. So if you're looking for a great, reputable organization I can personally vouch for. I've even gone there a few times on a Friday afternoon, or maybe we did it on Thursday, I'm not sure. I think it was on Thursday afternoon. It's been a little while, but we packed these boxes of Shabbos dinners that were then distributed to people. I haven't done it since COVID, but I think that their activities are even more important now during COVID. So the link is there. Donate to them during their drive. Every dollar you give is going to help feed, shelter, clothe, get people on their feet. It's great. Tomche LA. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is dedicated by, I've got 2 dedications here. David Wolf, a good friend of mine, and he is Rabbi Reuven Wolf's father. If you ever heard my podcast episode with Rabbi Reuven Wolf discussing the Jewish understanding of the Messiah, it's amazing. You can find that in the podcast page. His dad, David Wolf, lives in Brooklyn. He's a fantastic guy. He donated to our annual campaign and dedicates tonight's show to Sal and Nina. So thank you so much, my good friend, David Wolf. Also, we have a dedication from Rick Richardson, and I love this. Rick is dedicating tonight's episode in honor of Joseph and Ann Levin, who introduced my parents to each other, took me to my first Seder at age 6, and taught me by their actions of the deep love of Judaism. A beautiful dedication to Joseph and Ann Levin from Rick Richardson. And Rick, may you and all your loved ones, and David Wolf, you and all your loved ones, your lives should have so much abundance and have overflowing. Your lives should be overflowing with blessings in every way. And we say amen. One last announcement before we start. This is really big news, so you're happy you're listening right now. Thursday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Going to have an AT Live with a very special guest. Going to be talking about his incredible career and the differences between Talmudic law and United States law and Israel advocacy and a number of other issues with the world famous Professor Alan Dershowitz. Going to be here on AT Live Thursday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. That's something you won't want to miss. We'll post about it tomorrow. Okay, where are we holding? This is Daf Lamed Aleph, page 31 of Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the Laws of Passover. We are in chapter 2. Today we're going to be discussing the third Mishnah, a new Mishnah finally, Mishnah number 3, and actually Mishnah number 4 as well. And we're going to finish Mishnah number 4. So we're covering 2 Mishnahs today, though we'll focus most of our time on the third Mishnah here of chapter 2 in Tractate Pesachim. So let's read the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is a little bit confusing. You know, maybe I'm going to need my my whiteboard so I can make some notes for you as I discuss. We'll see if I can keep it clear with just talk, or maybe we'll go to the dry markers, dry erase markers, the dry erase marker. All right. Okay. So here's the Mishnah. I'm just going to read it. The Mishnah is confusing. Okay, the Mishnah is a little bit confusing. I'm going to read it slow, but then we're going to unpack it. So don't worry if it doesn't make sense as soon as you hear it. Here's the Mishnah. If a Gentile lent money to a Jew, and the Jew gave him leavened bread, chametz, as collateral for the loan until after Passover, and after Passover, the Gentile retains the leavened bread in lieu of payment, then one is permitted to derive benefit, a Jew is permitted to derive benefit from this leavened bread. Since the leavened bread was retained by the Gentile based on the transfer that took place prior to Passover, the leavened bread is considered to have belonged to the Gentile during Passover. Whereas, if a Jew lent money to a Gentile and leavened bread was given as collateral during Passover in the same manner as in the previous case, then after Passover it is prohibited to derive benefit, it's prohibited for a Jew to derive benefit from this leavened bread. Since this leavened bread was considered to be in the Jew's property during Passover, it is forbidden to derive benefit from it afterward. All right, let's start unpacking that. So first of all, the important principle is, as we've seen, so a Jew is not allowed to possess chametz, leavened bread, leavened products, during the week-long festival of Passover. If a Jew did possess some chametz, some leavened bread, it was prohibited for him to eat it, and it was prohibited for him to own it. Because he owned it when it was prohibited for him to own it, the sages decreed that chametz is going to remain prohibited even after Passover. So the fact that a Jew owned it during Passover means it's going to stay prohibited after Passover. Now, the question that we're really dealing with in this Mishnah is, what does it mean to have chametz in your possession? We already said that the normal thing to do, right, is so that we don't have to throw away and destroy all of the boxes of cereal and all the leavened canned goods and leavened bottled goods and all the leavened products one might have in a kitchen that a Jew can't possess it during Passover. So then what do? Some chametz we're going to destroy so that we can go through the mitzvah of destroying chametz that's in our possession. But usually that's more like a symbolic amount. What we really do is before Passover starts, while the chametz is still permitted to be in our possession, we sell it to a non-Jew through a symbolic but real transfer. And then we store it for the non-Jew, like in our garage, but really separated by clear partitions so that there's no chance that it's going to get mixed up with what's in our kitchen that we might come to eat it. So we might have it on our property, but it belongs to a non-Jew, and so it is not in my possession. So we've already said that having it on my property doesn't mean that I own it, right? I would just be like holding it here for the non-Jew who bought it. So that does not count as in my possession. Now we're going to complicate this idea of what does it mean to own the chametz, to have it in our possession, amongst our possessions, amongst our property. Here we're going to introduce the idea of a loan and collateral. Now, this discussion is going to be a little bit foreshadowing the kinds of discussions that we'll have in the middle of our 7.5-year journey through the Talmud, when we're going to be talking at length about the laws of contracts and commerce and exchange of money for goods and lending and collateral, etc. So here, it's just a preview, and it's really only for today. We may come back around in Tractate Pesachim. I don't remember from the last time I went through this material, but we're going to get to even the fourth Mishnah is not going to be about this topic of loans and collateral. But today, in order to understand this Mishnah, the third Mishnah here in chapter 2, we are going to get into what it means to lend and to offer collateral. And the question is, when does a creditor who accepts collateral for a loan, does he own it or not? That's really what's at stake here, right? When somebody borrows money, right? So we're going to let's get into it, and then we'll start to see it. But the basic question is, if I borrow money from you and I give you some property as collateral, or I really offer it to you as collateral, and the idea is if I don't pay you, okay, well then you're going to take the collateral. But the question is, at the time that we make our deal, which is before Passover, did the collateral become yours? So that during Passover, if I don't, and then I don't pay you after Passover the money, so you keep the collateral. So the question is when, and this collateral is in the form of bread, of chametz. So the question is, when did the bread become yours? Right? Did I own it during Passover, or did you own it during Passover when it was serving as collateral for a loan? That's the question that we're going to be exploring. Okay. Now, what's interesting is on this question, does the collateral be in a situation where, right, you're going to lend me money, I'm going to put up this chametz as collateral. Let's just say this property as collateral. And then at the time that the loan comes due, I'm not going to pay you, right? For whatever reason, I'm not going to pay you. I'm going to decide to just give you the collateral, or I don't have the money, or for whatever reason, I'm not going to pay the loan, but there's collateral, so you're going to keep the collateral. So the question is, at the time that the collateral becomes fully yours, because I didn't pay the loan, is that when you acquired the collateral? Or did you have rights in the collateral at the time that we made the loan? And I mean, you did, right? Because it's the collateral for a loan. You had some rights in that collateral. Do those rights amount to ownership, right? Did you actually own the collateral retroactively from the time we made the deal? Or did you only come to own the collateral at the time that the loan came due and I didn't pay, right? So that's the question. Abaye says it is retroactive. if you're lending me money, I'm putting up this property as collateral. Then later when the loan comes due, I don't pay. You seize the collateral. According to Abaye, that collateral is understood to have actually become yours retroactively from the time we made the deal. That's according to Abaye. Rava says no. The collateral becomes yours when the loan comes due and I don't pay, and then you seize it as fully yours. That's when you actually come to own the collateral. Abaye says retroactive to when we made the deal. Rava says no, only when the loan comes due and you seize the collateral at that point. That's when it becomes yours. Now, all agree on the following. Let's say, and here we might as well start like this, okay? So let's say, let me just get this right. Reuven lends Shimon money, all right? Reuven lends Shimon money, right? Is this going to be on camera? Making sure. All right. Reuven lends Shimon money. Shimon puts up property as collateral, all right? So there's going to be property here, right? Property, and that is collateral, okay? Shimon puts up the property as collateral. Now, if Shimon, so right now the money hasn't been paid back, right? It's not payment for property, it's a loan, right? This money is a loan, okay? So while the loan is outstanding, if Shimon takes this property, which he puts up as collateral, and Shimon sells that property, which is collateral for the loan, but he sells it to, levy, right? Sale. Or he consecrates it to the temple, meaning he donates the property to the holy temple. So now when you give something to the temple, it acquires holiness. So that's why we say he consecrates the property. It would mean that he donated it to the temple. Now, did Shimon have a right to sell this property, which is collateral for his loan that he borrowed, the money borrowed from Reuven? While the money's still outstanding, can Reuven go ahead and sell that same property to Levi or consecrate it to the temple? All agree he cannot. He cannot. I mean, he can actually go through the motions of making the sale, but if he fails to pay the money back to Reuven, then Reuven can come over here and grab the property, and the sale to Levi would be voided. Levi didn't know that Shimon had already mortgaged the property, had put it up as collateral to Reuven. Levi didn't know that, and that's why when we buy property, we also get a guarantee that the property is not encumbered. So that if this were to happen, Levi, he can't say anything to Reuven because Reuven already had rights in this property. It was collateral in this loan. But Levi could go back to Shimon and say, hey, Reuven came along and took that property because you owed him money. But you gave me, when I bought the property, you told me it was unencumbered. So there's a guarantee on that property. Give me other property like I paid for, right? So that's what Levi can say. Levi's complaint is with Shimon. But all agree that if while the property is put up as collateral for this loan that Reuven gave to Shimon, until Shimon pays the money back, if he tries to dispose of the property by selling or consecrating, all agree Reuven can come along and override that sale or that consecration. Right, so if that property went to the temple, Shimon tried to consecrate that property to the holy temple, Reuven can come along and take it back, right? Because if Shimon doesn't pay his loan. There is this issue that it's a little different giving it to the temple than selling it to some third party. Why? Because the temple is the temple. So when property is given to the temple, it acquires holiness. It is consecrated. So if you're not going to remove it from the domain of the temple, it has to be redeemed, right? And so what Reuven can do, it's going to be redeemed for the value of the temple. Shimon had no right to consecrate that particular property. Really what he was doing is he borrowed money from Reuven. He put up that property as collateral. Then he wanted to make a big donation to the temple. All right, well, he owes the temple a big donation like he pledged when he tried to give them that property. He can't give that property because it's encumbered to Reuven. But so it has to be redeemed. So now what happens is Reuven seizes the land back. Shimon's going to have to deal with the temple, what he owes them. Reuven will have to give 1 dinar, right? It's like just $1 basically, to the temple, so that all understand, we all know that the property was consecrated, acquired holiness, it's being redeemed from the temple. So we're going to add a kind of symbolic extra dollar in payment to the temple, and then Reuven will tack on that $1 to the loan amount that he gave to Shimon. Either way, we all agree that if Shimon tries to dispose of the property while it is collateral for the loan that he got from Reuven, and then he doesn't pay Reuven, Reuven can override that sale or consecration and take his collateral. All agree on that. Where do they disagree? They disagree like this. Reuven lends money to Shimon. Shimon puts up this property as collateral. While the loan is still outstanding, Reuven disposes of the property. He sells the property, the same property to Levi, right? Or consecrate to the temple. Now it's an interesting question. Can Reuven dispose of this property? He has rights in it. It's collateral for a loan that he gave money to Shimon, but he didn't buy the property, right? It's not like he gave money to Shimon as a payment for this property, then it became his, and then Reuven could certainly sell it to Levi or consecrate it to the temple, whatever he wants to do. Rather, he lent money to Shimon. Shimon owes money to Reuven. He put up the property merely as collateral. Now, while that's that situation, if Reuven sells this property to Levi, or he tries to consecrate it to the temple, now we have a disagreement among the sages. Abaye says, well, let's just assume now if he does this and then Shimon, pays the money, well, Reuven's he's gonna have to come up with that land and give it back to Shimon, because Shimon, he owed money. He put up the property as collateral. He paid back the money. It's his property. The property never should have left his possession. But if Shimon defaults on the loan, then the fact that Reuven sold the property or consecrated it to the temple, even before the loan came due, it's like, well, it's not so bad, right? I mean, he foresaw that Shimon wasn't going to be able to pay, and maybe he took advantage of a market opportunity to sell that property, when it made sense to sell it. And it's like he took a gamble and it paid off because Shimon never paid back the loan. So he got the property as collateral and he's already made a sale or consecration with it. So if that consecration happens while the loan is still outstanding and Reuven disposes of the property, the lender disposes of the property. So Abaye says, okay, so because Shimon didn't pay, and Abaye has the principle that Reuven acquired those rights and he acquires possession retroactively. When Shimon doesn't pay, it's like Reuven is deemed to be the owner from the time they made the loan agreement. And therefore he did well to sell the property or consecrate the property even before the loan came due. He saw that was happening and he took advantage of the situation and he's good. According to Abaye, he's good. But Rava disagrees. Rava says, no. Shimon has the right to dispose of that property until he fails to pay the loan. The property was not sold, it was put up as collateral. Reuven had no right to sell that property or consecrate it to the temple until the due date of the loan. Even when the due date comes and Shimon doesn't pay, so at that moment, Reuven acquires the property. But he doesn't acquire it retroactively to the date of the loan. He only acquires it as fully his on the day that Shimon's loan comes due and he doesn't pay. You with me? Okay. The next question that the Gemara asks is, well, whoa. Did Rava actually say that there's no retroactive acquisition of the collateral dating back to the day that the loan agreement was made? This contradicts a teaching of Rava made in another situation, right? So we've seen this many times that a teaching is brought in the name of a certain sage, and it seems to have a clear ruling. But then the Gemara says, well, wait a minute, is that his ruling? Because it contradicts his own ruling, seemingly contradicts his own ruling in a different situation, where it might seem that Rava holds that there is retroactive acquisition of collateral dating not from the moment that the loan came due and wasn't paid, but dating all the way back, retroactively dating the transfer of the property to the day the loan agreement was made, and we make that retroactive designation later when the loan is not paid, but then we designate that the property changed hands actually at the time the loan agreement was made. What is that situation? All right. Let me erase my board. Here we go. Okay. Now, so Rami Bar Hama brings another case. In this other case, it goes like this. Reuven sells a field. Okay, he transfers a field to Shimon. All right, he transfers a field to Shimon. Shimon owes money for the field. Yeah, he owes money, but he's not going to pay it all at once. So instead, it's going to be like a mortgage, and Shimon is going to make debt payments. Right? He's going to make payments. All right. The field goes from Reuven to Shimon, and Shimon is going to owe, let's say monthly payments until he pays off the field that Reuven sold to him. All right? Very good. Makes sense. Now, we mentioned this in passing before. Reuven sells Shimon a field. Now, if I sell you a field, I'm going to guarantee to you that that field is not encumbered by somebody else's lien. Meaning, Reuven is going to also give to Shimon a guarantee. Right? A guarantee. Sorry for my handwriting. A guarantee. The guarantee is to Shimon that, some other guy, Levi, isn't going to come along and say, hey, I lent money to Reuven. Reuven didn't pay me back. He put up that same field that he sold to you. He put it up for me as collateral, and he did that before he sold it to you. That field is mine. So when Reuven sells a field to Shimon, he puts up a guarantee that if someone comes along and says, that field is mine, well, then I owe you another field that is the equivalent of the field that I just sold you, right? The guarantee means that what I'm selling you, I have the right to sell you. So Reuven gives Shimon the field with a guarantee. Shimon owes debt payments to Reuven. Then Reuven dies. Poor Reuven. Reuven dies. Reuven dies, and here comes Levi. Levi did give money to Reuven. Yes, he did. And Reuven gave Levi that field, the same field, as collateral. Right? This was a loan. And Levi lent money to Reuven, and Reuven put up his field as collateral. Uh-oh. Who's got a major problem now? Shimon. Shimon's got a big problem. Reuven dies. Levi shows up. He says that field was put up as collateral. I'm taking my field. Because obviously now Reuven is dead. His estate goes to the orphans. And the orphans say there's no money in the estate. And so, and in fact, he doesn't have to ask the orphans. The money has stopped flowing, right? He hasn't been paid. So he just goes and he seizes the field. That field was collateral for the earlier loan from Levi to Reuven. So he seizes the field. He seizes the field. Shimon is like, whoa, but Reuven guaranteed that it wouldn't be repossessed, that he had the right to sell it to me. You can't take it from me. And Levi says, that's not my problem. He shouldn't have made that guarantee. This field is mine. Shimon is desperate. He needs that field so that he can farm and make money or whatever. So Shimon, now he's got payments that he owes to Reuven, right? Maybe Reuven was using those payments to pay off Levi. So Shimon could, right, make a payment of money to Levi. Okay, so let's say he makes one payment to just try to get Levi off his back. All right, so now he's giving a little bit of money to Levi so he can hold on to the field. But now Reuven's son, I hope I'm not losing people. Reuven's son, Ben. Okay, Reuven's son, Ben. Now, Ben is an orphan and he's the heir to Reuven's estate. Now, Ben comes and he says to Shimon, well, you owe money to us, right? You bought a field from my father, from Reuven, and you owed a stream of payments to pay off that field. So pay us. Pay us the money that you owe him, that you owed my father. You should pay us that money. But Shimon has already paid money to Levi. So they say, so Shimon says, well, your father gave me a guarantee against repossession of the field, right? So if I have to give you money, then you give me the field. Now, here's the thing. Reuven's son, Ben, he can say to Shimon, your debt to my father, that's not real property. That's a debt instrument. That's considered movable property. Movable property is distinguished from real property, and according to Talmudic law, really Torah law, the heirs, the creditors of the guy who died, cannot come and seize the movable property. They can only come and seize real property, land. So this debt instrument, what Shimon owes Reuven, the kids, Reuven's kids, they can claim that stream of payments. They say, no, you owe it to us. No one else can come. Levi can't come and claim that. Give it to us. Shimon could say, well, your father guaranteed that my land wouldn't be seized, and that guy Levi came along and took the land that I bought from your father, so get me my land back. And the kids say, that's not our problem. We don't own that land. Levi took the land. That's some other issue. But you owe us these payments. So Shimon is out of luck. He's going to lose the land that Levi seized, and he still owes money to the kids. Shimon is in a really bad spot. But Rava says, if Shimon is clever, instead of paying money for that stream of payments that he still owes to Reuven, and therefore now to Reuven's heirs, to his son Ben, what he should do is he should pay it with land. Now, this assumes that he's got some other land than what Levi seized from him, or maybe he's got some land because he made at least some payment to Levi and got Levi off his back a little bit, maybe. But what Rav is saying is that if he pays with land rather than with money, now he's putting land into the estate of Reuven, right? Into that estate. And then that land is going to be treated differently than the movable property. It's like he pays his debt with land, but then he also has a lien on the land of the property because Reuven gave him a guarantee. Reuven gave Shimon a guarantee that that land wouldn't be repossessed. The land was repossessed, But if he pays his debt to Reuven's estate with land, now the estate has land, and he can claim that land in payment of the guarantee that Reuven gave him at the time that he bought the land. I know it's getting complicated, but the point is this. Rava suggested that Shimon would be better off paying with land. Why is that so? Because that land is going to have, in order for this work to work, Rava's advice that it would be better to pay with land, for that to work, it would have to be deemed that that land was already in the estate. In other words, there was a retroactive designation of the land that he's now being used to pay for this collateral. Like basically Shimon is putting up this other land as collateral for his own debt, and it's going to be deemed that it was retroactively owned by Reuven from the time that Reuven and Shimon made the deal. So since we learned that Rava does not believe in the principle of retroactive designation, and now we're hearing that Rava did advise a course of action that seems to rely on retroactive designation of the transfer of collateral to the time when the deal was made, therefore, Rava must agree with Abaye that when a lender enters into a loan agreement with a borrower and the borrower puts up property as collateral and then the borrower doesn't pay, that the collateral is, and then the lender seizes the collateral. But in terms of the outside world, we deem that the lender acquired that collateral at the time of the loan agreement, not at the time that the loan came due. Therefore, it would seem that Rava actually agrees with Abaye, and he does hold by retroactive designation. The Gemara says no, because we don't need to rely on retroactive designation to make this complicated land deal make sense. We can just rely on the teaching of Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Nassan said that if, much simpler, much simpler. Now we go real simple. So if Levi lends money to Reuven and Reuven lends money to Shimon, at the time that Shimon is going to pay back his loan, we can just make him pay Levi. Right? Levi lent money to Reuven, so Reuven owes Levi money. Reuven lent money to Shimon, so Shimon owes Reuven money. Since Reuven owes Levi, Shimon can simply owe Levi, right? And when a court has to step in and unwind complicated financial transactions, if somebody both borrowed and lent, then we disregard him. We just take the middleman out of the equation, and we just have the final borrower pay the initial lender. And that's not relying on retroactive designation. It's just that Levi lent money to Reuven. Reuven lent money to Shimon in order to purchase his own field. But really, Shimon owes money to Levi, and we can work it out that way without, unpacking this whole thing all over again to get into the exact details. The point is that Rava does not hold by retroactive transfer of collateral, and that whole situation did not prove that Rava does hold by retroactive designation. Abaye holds by retroactive transfer of collateral. Rava does not. That's what we conclude from this story. Okay, so in that case, we go back to the Mishnah. How do we get into this whole financial mess? What we were talking about in our Mishnah is if a Gentile, let's get it over here in front of us again. All right. So we have a Gentile. What's important about a Gentile? A Gentile is permitted to eat chametz during Passover. There's no restriction on him. But the Jew is not. So we have a Gentile, and he lends money to a Jew. And the Jew puts up collateral, but this time, instead of a field or a car or a house, what does he put up? He puts up some inventory of leavened bread, right? So the property in question is bread. Whoa, bread. Okay, so the Jew puts up leavened bread as collateral. So in that case, so they made this deal before Passover, right? So before Passover, the Gentile lent money to the Jew. The Jew put up the bread as collateral. After Passover, the Jew said, okay, you know what? I'm not going to pay you back. Just keep the collateral, right? It says, if I sold you all that bread, probably the collateral is worth more than the loan. So just keep the bread in lieu of payment of the loan. So the question for us is, who owned the bread during Passover? Did the Gentile retroactively acquire that bread at the time that the loan agreement was made, so that during Passover it was in the possession of the Gentile, in which case there was no transgression of a Jew owning chametz, bread, leavened products during Passover? In that case, the chametz would be permitted for a Jew to eat after Passover. Or if the bread actually remained the property of the Jew, it was collateral, but at the time that he, that the loan comes due and he doesn't pay and he says, take the bread. So is it like Rava, that the Gentile only acquires the chametz, the bread, after Passover at the time that the loan goes unpaid? Or is it like Abaye, that the Gentile is deemed to have acquired the collateral, the bread, from the time the loan agreement was made, which was before Passover? That's the question. And it must be that we hold by retroactive designation like Abaye, because the Mishna said, and let's read it again, if a Gentile lent money to a Jew, and the Jew gave him leavened bread as collateral until after Passover, and after Passover the Gentile retains this leavened bread in lieu of payment, then one is permitted to derive benefit from this leavened bread. In other words, a Jew can eat this chametz after Passover. It must be that chametz was not owned by some other Jew or any Jew during Passover. It's permitted for eating because it must have been owned by a Gentile during Passover. That it was put up as collateral, and then the payment was not made on the debt. So it must be that we hold like Abaye and we make this retroactive designation. And likewise, the Mishnah, the second part of the Mishnah, says it in reverse, right? If the Jew lends money to the Gentile and the Gentile puts up bread as collateral, then after Passover, the Gentile doesn't pay the loan back and says keep the bread. Then according to the same principle of Abaye, this retroactive designation, then the bread is deemed to have been owned by the Jew during Passover. That's a transgression. Now no Jew can eat that bread. It's going to remain prohibited chametz, prohibited leaven forever, because it was owned by a Jew during Passover, right? So that's what we learned today about collateral and when it actually changes hands so that it is deemed owned, and who owns it, right? Now this case can be altered a little bit. The sages will explore some other nuances of this. In the case, for example, one question is, well, what about if the chametz, the collateral, was actually deposited with the lender? Does that change the situation? So let's say that the Jew lends money to a Gentile. The Gentile puts up the bread as collateral, but the collateral is deposited at the home of the Jew. So now we know that if the Gentile owns the collateral, if the Gentile owns the bread, if I sell the bread to the Gentile and I'm just storing it for him in my garage, that is permitted, right? I don't own it. I'm just storing it from him. I've fully partitioned it off away from all my other stuff. It's not going to come anywhere near my kitchen. That is permitted. But if it's deposited in my house and it's collateral, do I own it? Right? Then it's a different question. If the Gentile doesn't pay back the loan after Passover, well, then it's going to be deemed that I owned it. right? It doesn't even matter where it was stored. The deposit, the location of the deposit doesn't matter according to this reasoning. Okay, and then we have just one more little very interesting wrinkle to this. That they add to the analysis Rabbi Yitzchak's point. So Rabbi Yitzchak says with respect to collateral, we have a verse in the Torah. In the Torah it says at Deuteronomy 24:13, you shall surely return the pledge to him when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his garment and bless you. And it shall be a righteousness for you before the Lord your God. So this is a situation where basically a well-to-do person lends money to an impoverished person, and the impoverished person borrows money and puts up his cloak as collateral, right? His cloak, like his clothing, or it could be the millstone. Well, let's not talk about millstone. It puts up his cloak, right? So it's like he's really got nothing. And so the Torah teaches that in that situation, well, the cloak might be collateral. It might be collateral, but it's going to be deemed a righteousness for you to give him the cloak to use to sleep in at night so he doesn't freeze to death, the poor guy. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak says, if it's called righteousness for you to give him the collateral of the loan so that he can use it at night. So this is a situation where the collateral is deposited with the lender, and it's deemed a righteousness for the lender to give it back to the borrower so he can sleep in it at night. Now, why is it righteousness? Because the lender owns the collateral, right? His rights in the collateral are very strong, and it's considered a righteousness, a good deed, for this lender to give the borrower back his cloak so he can sleep in it at night. So according to Rabbi Yitzchak, this is more evidence that the collateral is deemed to be owned, possessed by the creditor, right? By the creditor during the time of the loan. And again, it's like what Abaye said that we would deem later if the loan isn't paid, that the lender owned this thing from the time they made the loan agreement. Okay, and the law is... Let me just read the law here. It was right over here. Where's the halacha? Hold on. Leavened bread as collateral. Okay, so if a Gentile lent money to a Jew with leavened bread as collateral, and the Jew said to him, if I do not pay back my loan by such and such a time, the collateral become your property from now, i.e. retroactively, then a Jew may derive benefit from this leavened bread after Passover. Similarly, if a Jew lent money to a Gentile and the Gentile made a similar statement, then it is forbidden for a Jew to derive benefit from this leavened bread after Passover because it is deemed retroactively owned from the time of the loan. But note that the way the law finally ended up is different than our discussion has been, because there it says they need to stipulate at the time that they make the loan that if I don't pay you back, this collateral is going to become yours from the time of the loan agreement, right? From the time that we entered into this agreement. Meaning that if we don't make that stipulation, it's actually considered that the collateral stays in the possession for the purposes of this question of ownership during Passover. With respect to chametz, it's actually considered in this case, that if the Jew lends money to the Gentile puts up the bread as collateral, and they don't make this stipulation, then afterwards that's going to be permitted leaven, because it's not going to retroactively be designated that it belonged to the Jew from the time they made the loan agreement. The Jew is only going to acquire the collateral when the loan goes unpaid after Passover, and so the collateral is going to be deemed, the chametz is going to be deemed to have been owned by the Gentile during Passover, and the Jew, and it's permitted, and the Jew didn't own it during Passover. All right, that's not easy stuff. It's not easy to keep track of all of this. The first time I read it, I could barely stay aswim in it, barely stay floating in it. But the second time you go through it, it gets clearer, and the third time clearer still. So if you really want to grok this, maybe listen to this class again, and I bet you will. So let's very quickly just read the fourth Mishnah. We're not going to have time to really discuss it, and then I'm going to come to your comments and questions. Mishnah number 5, here of chapter, Mishnah number 4, I'm sorry, here of chapter 2, much simpler question. No complicated financial transactions, loans and collateral, etc. Mishnah number 4 in chapter 2 of Tractate Pesachim. Leaven bread upon which a rock slide has fallen is considered as though it has been eliminated, and it is not necessary to dig it up in order to burn it. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, any leavened bread that has been covered to such an extent that a dog cannot search after it is considered to have been eliminated. So this is a situation, we're still talking about this question of possession, right? So if the chametz is in my house, it's my chametz and it's in my house, but I can't get at it. Why can't I get at it? Because it was in, my storage shed in my backyard, which was at the foot of a hill, and there was a rock slide, and my whole shed and everything in it got buried by rocks. So there is chametz on my property, but I can't get at it. Now, we're going to have, this recital of nullification at the time we search for chametz, and again at the time of burning, that any chametz that I didn't find or otherwise dispose of, it should be declared ownerless and nullified, and it's not mine, so that I don't possess chametz. But if you know it's there, you would think you'd have to get rid of it. But in this case, it's just impossible to get it there. It's not that I didn't find it, it's that it's impossible. So then what the sages will say, okay, so if it's impossible, it's impossible. It's not in your possession. It doesn't belong to anybody because it's impossible to get to it. What is impossible, though? They're going to be a little bit careful about that. And basically, Rabbi Shimon comes and says that if a dog can dig it up, well, then it is accessible, and you should go dig it up and get rid of it. But if even a dog isn't going to dig it up, then it's truly inaccessible. And then they define, well, what is inaccessible? And basically they say 3 hand breadths deep. If it's 3 hand breadths deep of rocks and dirt, so then a dog is not going to smell it and go rooting after it, and then it is truly buried and inaccessible. But if it's less than 3 hand breadths deep, a dog will smell it and will dig for it, and therefore it is not nullified, and you have to go dig it up so that you can get rid of the chametz, and it won't be in your possession during Passover. The Gemara will comment, though, that if one is hiding money, like if one is entrusted to take care of some money for someone else, and his method of taking care of the money so that it shouldn't be lost or stolen is to put it in a hole in the ground, then he is deemed to have done his job of securing the money with a hole that is just 1 hand breadth deep, because really all you're trying to do is to remove the money from view. No one will know that it's there if it's out of sight. You don't have to go 3 hand breadths down because money has no scent. There's not like a dog going to go dig after that money. You just have to get it out of view. But when you're talking about, when does something become out of our reach, out of our possession because, a dog won't go digging after it with something with a scent, so then it has to be 3 hand breadths in the ground. That's what I've got for us today. Let me come to your comments and questions. I'll mention again that today we said that in addition to donating your hard-earned money to us to enable us to share Torah with people around the world, it is also good to donate to Tomche LA, and we put their link there in the comments. I think it's at the top of the comments. Nina put it in. Wonderful organization here in LA that feeds people, particularly Shabbos dinners, but also provides food to other people when they have food insecurity, as well as shelter, clothing, and helping people find jobs. Amazing organization. They're having a 48-hour fundraiser. The link is there, and that's a beautiful place to donate some of your hard-earned money. Okay, questions and comments. Let me get that open. My link disappeared by mistake. Okay. Here we go. Neil in Virginia. Is the penalty for not destroying chametz and having it in your possession during Pesach the same as retroactively having collateral chametz in a Jew's home? Yes, right? If you possess chametz during Passover, you possess chametz during Passover. If it's going to be prohibited after because it was in the possession of a Jew, so then it was in the possession of a Jew. And the one who possessed has violated that prohibition in the Torah. And as we've learned before, the punishment for that is karas, right? Excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court. Bill, oof, quote, oof. All this debt talk is making my head spin despite being fascinating, probably because I just finished a theology paper on the subject of debt relief. Suffice to say, I'm actually kind of glad we aren't going to be with this topic for a long time. Fair enough. Okay, one last question, and this is from Nina. Is there a way to avoid a situation where Reuven misled Shimon and Levi was able to seize the land, maybe a detailed contract in the beginning? Yes, and that's where we ended up, that they need to make the stipulation about when the collateral is deemed to have changed hands, right? And of course, nowadays, when there's anybody who has purchased property, right, real property, that you sign, it's the paperwork is astronomical. There's so many long contracts. This is not totally unfamiliar to me. I was a lawyer briefly in New York. In fact, I was a corporate lawyer working in New York City. And my job as a young associate, was to, make sure that all the documents were present at the closing, right? When property, sometimes a company, sometimes real property, sometimes a building, sometimes an airplane, whatever the major property was that was going to cost millions of dollars, that all of the documents had been, drawn up, secured, signed, etc., and they were all present at the closing. And it was just a massive number of documents. And what are all these documents, and particularly the purchase agreement, which is, 80, 100, 200 pages, crazy numbers of pages in the purchase agreement. And that is lawyers over the centuries working out all of the different possibilities of how that deal can go wrong and writing in their clauses to say, well, if it goes wrong in such and such a way, we'll do this. And if it goes wrong in that way, it's going to be like this. And this is at a much earlier point in history. But what we see right away is that if we think that, complex purchase agreements only started, in the 1900s or the 1800s or the 1700s, forget about it. The sages were talking about complex purchase agreements, loans and transfers, etc., thousands of years ago. And in fact, this was very influential in the development of common law. The sages took this stuff very seriously. And of course, everything is based in Torah, right? So the fundamental natural rights that are being protected in these contracts and in these transfers of wealth, as it were, transfers of value, are underpinned by Torah principles, right? You can't steal, you can't lie, you can't misrepresent, etc., right? So there was a tremendous sophistication of contract law that was going on even, thousands of years ago. That's not to say that, when Reuven and Shimon, who are just two farmers, who lived next door to each other for a long time, and they decide to make a deal on a handshake, that they drew up a complex written agreement, right? So then when you have these, agreements that are not memorialized with carefully written contracts because they didn't bring lawyers into the fold, then it falls to the judges to kind of unwind all the difficulties that came up in that agreement. One thing that I learned as a lawyer, and I think I heard Danny DeVito say this in the play Other People's Money, which I think was a movie as well. And I think he said, lawyers are like nuclear weapons, right? They suck for the world, but the other side has theirs, so you got to have yours. I say that as a lawyer, at least as a recovering lawyer. But the fact is, you need a lawyer. If you're going to get into any kind of complicated agreement, you need a lawyer. You can't do that yourself because you don't have the experience with all these pitfalls that have been worked out over the centuries of what can go wrong. And when you read the language of a contract, it seems like English, but it's not. It's jargon. And all these words have defined meanings that's understood in courts of law and that normal people, don't understand. And that's why you got to bring a lawyer. Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Don't go without a lawyer to a deal that's going to end up in litigation, God forbid. All right, that's what I've got for us tonight. It's been great learning with you. Tonight's class was not easy at all, but it was just a taste of the principles that are involved when people purchase property from one another, and instead of just buying it, get involved with a loan, with collateral, with guarantee. It was a nice little introduction to some of these concepts.